Hi, my name's Rassi. I am a leadership coach, book coach, author, and speaker, and the host of Hard Conversations, A Day Worth Having. We finished unpacking that with so many questions from our audience and so many stories shared by our panelists. Check out the recording and feel free to let us know in the comments what resonated for you and what your takeaway were. And we hope you'll join us in our next conversation. And there's so much more to come from this. All right, enjoy.
Because you are discovering new things about yourself, you're discovering new things about the subject matter in particular, and also the person you're having the conversation with. So there's a lot to unpack from Hard Conversation, and I had to change up my perspective towards it. And ever since, I'm super excited to have hard conversations. And I would unpack that definition as we progress. Thank you.
Woo, that's good. That's hot. Let me think about that. All right, we're gonna go to Chris.
Hi, everybody. Rassi, thank you so much for having me here today. Happy to join. A little bit about myself. I started at a grocery store called Save On Foods when I was 16 years old. I was able to pioneer with them out east in Canada, and I've worked in about 12 different locations. I've worked in places like Calgary, Winnipeg, Regina, Fort McMurray, and now in a little town called Camrose. I've thoroughly enjoyed my career. It's led me to lots of leadership roles over the years, and you know, once again, excited to meet somebody like Rassi that I'd be able to share all these things with and collaborate and join a great group of panelists. So, what does a hard conversation mean to me? To me, it feels like an integral moment where you seek to find resolve but know there is a chance of emotional, physical, or operational repercussion if not delivered or received in the right way. A hard conversation is only hard because of the fear that surrounds it. Hard conversations come in many forms, but for myself, it shows the most common as behavioral actions that do not align with the organization or work culture, operational concerns that have started to affect the success of others or the business, time and attendance management that may impact somebody's livelihood or access to benefits, providing honest feedback during annual success meetings with high and low performers of the team, speaking with unsuccessful candidates for open positions, answering and acting on customer dissatisfaction, most commonly shown in the form of poor customer service or product quality, challenging upwards when something doesn't sit right with you, your business, or the future of your team, looking in the mirror to be real with yourself, resetting, then adjusting based on the challenges set in front of you. To me, a hard conversation is an extension to grow, a new way forward, and something that will have a long-term consequences if left unchecked. Thank you.
Wow, I'm doing this too. It's amazing. As you listening to our panelists share what does a hard conversation mean to you, I invite you to, reflect on that question yourself. What does that mean to you as you listening to the different option, the different perspective? So I'm going to pass it on to Claudia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be with this panel and to be in front of all of you. I am a cognitive behavior, competence, and life purpose coach, known as the enthusiasm igniter and self-doubt eraser. So this is definitely my jam because I help people find courage to have these conversations. So it's wonderful. Hard conversations to me are all around your own perception. We try to control the outcome, and that's why we get nervous about having these conversations. We don't want to go into them because our brains are creating these scenarios of what we think is actually going to happen. When you let go of the outcome and you lead the conversation with your heart, whether it be in your personal or professional life, knowing that in your heart of hearts, you care about this person you're having this conversation with. And if they know that going into the conversation will not be as hard as you believe it to. Obviously, you have to give hard news sometimes to people, but there's always a way to soften the blow. And if you start that conversation by letting them know, this is something we need to talk about. The reason we're talking about it is because it's important to me, because you are important to me. And I'm not doing you justice by not letting you know this. If you go into any conversation with kindness and sincerity, even if it is difficult, even if it's going to be hard for the person to swallow, if they know that you care, the message will be different.
I feel the care. I feel the care. All right. Thank you so much, Claudia. All right, Kim, what you got?
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having us here, Razi, and bringing us all together. Like, I'm super excited to be here. I'm already resonating with what everyone's saying, so this is going to be a really awesome session. So, my name is Kim. I'm a technology manager at Best Buy Canada. So, for the past 4 years, I've been in various leadership and management roles in the technology and e-commerce space. So, I help to lead teams, I coach leaders, I bring about process improvements. So, a lot of fun stuff there. When I think about having a hard conversation, what comes to my mind is my mindset and how I am approaching it. So, whether it's a conversation with a colleague or a direct report, I go into these conversations with a very similar mindset. So, I have a few rules or mandates that really help guide my a little bit more later on.
Also,
But the most important one is the mindset that nothing is really a hard or difficult conversation. So just remember you're talking to another human being. It's only difficult if you really think it's difficult. So this mindset has really helped me to alleviate any nerves or uncomfortable feelings, and it gives me the ability to bring up topics that may be the elephant in the room. So if I'm prepping to have a hard conversation, I always take the time to reflect on the situation. Like I don't want to go into a conversation with high emotions. It's really important for me to be in a nice calm state and to have really clearly thought through what an ideal outcome would look like. Now that outcome may not always turn out how I envision it, but that's okay. And giving yourself that space is, you have to accept that. So going into a hard conversation, I always approach it much thing. And I always want to ensure the other person feels like they're being heard.
Oh, that's a strong one at the end, making them feel heard. That's very, very important in having hard conversations. Thank you, Kim. All right, Shauna, I'm gonna pass it on to you.
Thank you so much, Razzie, and thanks for organizing this and having this really much needed conversation. I think that, well, first let me introduce myself. So I'm Shauna LaTroy, and I'm a stress and burnout prevention coach for overwhelmed women managers. And so my philosophy is that, we sometimes ignore these small stressors that happen on a daily basis. And if we leave them unchecked, they culminate and have a huge impact like burnout. So I help women handle daily stresses and manage daily stresses so that it doesn't culminate to this big impact. And so this is such a great discussion today because hard conversations is definitely part of the leadership role. And what I find that hard conversations mean to me, it's twofold. And I'm with Kim, where I look at it from the mindset point of view. And the first thing that comes to mind is the hard part of the conversation. What type of emotion do I think it's going to bring up? Is it going to bring up some emotion of rejection, of being maybe ostracized by the other person, maybe being incompetent? So those are all kinds of situations that play out, similar to what Claudia was saying as well, going to worst case scenarios. And when you're able to really put your emotions in check and kind of take a step back and look at the conversation as an exchange of facts. And what makes it hard is our interpretation of what's being said in the conversation. So understand that you have your interpretation of what the facts are, and the other person has an interpretation of what the facts are, and you're coming to a common kind of airing out what that actually means to you. And one of the other parts of a hard conversation for me is the uncertainty of the outcome. We all have an idea of how we would like the outcome to be, and we also place some intention, But, the only person that we can control in the conversation is ourselves. We can't control the other person. We can definitely influence. However, it's having your own back, knowing that you'll have to release the reins and let the outcome play out the way it's supposed to, and then also not treat yourself with compassion, as well as treating the other person with compassion and kindness throughout the conversation, and not beating yourself up afterwards once the conversation's complete. So we'll unpack a little bit more, but just at first glance, that's kind of what a hard conversation means to me.
Mm. Whew, that's really good. We're getting like actual hands clap. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Shauna. I'm just gonna do a call out to the audience. Feel free to put it in the chat. Any questions you like us to, you like me to ask our panelists here. I'm gonna move on to the next question. So first, you know what, Shauna, I'll start with you and I'll kind of go backwards if that's okay. What has been your experience in having hard conversations while wearing two hats? So when you're not in a leadership role and when you've been in a leadership role.
Okay. And it's such a great question because it's definitely the approach is similar. However, I feel it much harder to be having that hard conversation in a non-leadership role. So in my personal life, I find that conversation much more difficult. In a leadership role, it's part of my role as a leader. It's part of the job. So it's almost like, okay, I put my leadership hat on, but in say personal conversations, you don't really have that defined role. So you're not in a position of necessarily authority, depending on who you're talking to. So the way I'd like to kind of differentiate the two is the fact that in a professional role, I am much more able to go with the facts, and it's much more difficult in a personal conversation to remove yourself from the emotion. And so I think that those are the two differences for me. But I think Kim had mentioned before, and Claudia, about approaching it with love. And I've talked about love and leadership as well. So those are the similarities, because you can have, love for your team, love for the people that you work with, and because love comes in so many different forms. And I think when you are approaching a hard conversation with that kindness, that compassion, that empathy, and really seeking to understand instead of seeking to be understood, I think that goes a long way.
Mm. I love that you highlighted those skills. They're definitely important to keep in mind. Um, wow, yeah. That I'm still unpacking in my brain as as you're sharing that. And I do agree with you that when you are not in a leadership role, it's actually more difficult, right? Because these are, especially sometimes it's people we've known for a very long time. And I see a question coming in. We're definitely going to come to that next. What about you, Kim? What has been your experience in having hard conversations wearing these two hats?
Yeah, definitely. So whether I've been in like an official leadership role with like direct reports or like a non-leadership role, I feel like I do approach all my difficult conversations with a very similar mindset. So as I mentioned before, I don't really like to overthink it. I don't like to label things as a difficult conversation. But I did want to walk you guys through kind of like my 5 rules or guidelines that I use to guide my thinking in these types of conversations. So my first one, as I mentioned before, like nothing is ever a difficult conversation. So remember, you're just talking to another human. It's only difficult if you think it's difficult. My second one is approach the conversation with curiosity. So ask questions and try to see the situation from their perspective. What's bugging them? Has there been a big life change for them recently? Do they even realize that their behaviors are different? So these are really important to understand. I usually like to spend time with people to really understand from their perspective. The third one is to bring up your observations with them and see if they agree or disagree. So when I share my observations, I keep it very factual, stating like what I saw or things that were said, and point out any behaviors that I feel need to be talked about. I want to avoid the feeling that they are being blamed. So I don't want that to happen. But I also talk about the impact and what my observations are. So once I share this information, I always give the person the space to think about it and respond to what I'm saying. If they also recognize that behavior change and agree with my observations, then I know I'm a step closer to getting to that resolution. So my fourth one here is to discuss what the next steps are and ask them to make a plan on how they're going to get there. What support do they need? I would never want that individual to feel alone. And my last one here is always provide that safe environment. So always provide support along the way, be open to having those conversations, asking how things are, following up with them, and giving both positive and constructive feedback. So I always take all those 5 things into consideration. And for me, that has really helped to ensure I have a positive outcome in any hard or difficult conversations I'm having.
Wow, Kim, that's very thorough. I'm loving the emojis. Please keep them coming in. I love the facts part because that's something I know in my experience that I had to work on in my various leadership roles is because sometimes our mind we tell ourselves the story of what is happening, but that is not really the reality of what is happening. And then approaching it with that curiosity, as you said. A great point highlighted there, and a great learning to take away. Thank you so much, Kim. I'm gonna pass it on to Claudia.
I agree that there are similarities and non-similarities in both of these. For me, the personal I find is a lot more difficult because especially if you come from a family like mine that doesn't do the work, there's a lot of hitting below the belt and the blame game, and knowing that going into these conversations, you have to arm yourself prior to going in, because you know for your own self that you don't want to go over that line, that cross that boundary, and then become what you're trying to not have happen. So you have to make sure that if you know you're triggered in these situations, that you are taking care of yourself prior to going in. So for me, that's having a conversation with myself, making sure I can get my point across. I have found in my own personal life, I was in a very toxic marriage, and having these hard conversations, writing them down and handing them was actually better to get my message heard, because as soon as I would speak, it was immediately being dismissed. And I've had that in the same situation with leaders where they don't want to hear your idea, even though you have one. And I found that writing out a step-by-step plan, or, whatever your idea is, or if there's something that's really bothering you, I once had to write an email to an executive leader who was constantly breaking my boundaries, which I in turn was allowing at that point, to constantly call me on vacations off and out. And I responded at 2 a.m. and I said, listen, here's the thing, because I don't understand why my communication is not coming through to you. So I'm going to make this really clear, because as you can see, it's 2 a.m. When I'm off, I'm off. Unless this is like the building is burning down, this is your role when I'm not here. So you need to take control of that, because I'm not going to live here 24/7. And in that moment, the conversation then turned to a valuable conversation in person the next day, because clearly I was awake. It was keeping me up. I wasn't sleeping because this was on my mind. But had I started with this conversation, and he literally said, I was kind of upset when you sent that message. I was like, what is this? But then I digested it. And after I digested it, I realized I've been allowing the same thing too. And I need to put up better boundaries for this as well, so that I can be with my family. I can have a life outside of work. So something that was hard for me to say, but I said it because it was important to me. It was important for my own self, turned out to be important for someone else at the same time. But when it comes to a personal situation with people in your family, your friends, if you know going into it, you know them probably better than you know your team, especially if you've grown up with them or lived with them, and you know how they respond or react to things. Going into it with that knowledge ahead of time will actually make you be able to make a more beneficial conversation because you know where to smooth things out, as opposed to just going in headstrong and looking for an argument, because at that point you're going to get one.
That is, oh, there's so many points, Claudia, so many points. I really like the idea of writing it down. That's a great practice. And I love your emphasis on starting with self, right? Like what is it that you need, and building those boundaries and taking care of yourself. And I know for sure, like with triggers, that's something that, and it comes with awareness, right? Before identifying these are the triggers that, sets me off, and maybe shouldn't be having that hard conversation right now that I'm set off. Thank you. That there was a lot of insight to take away from there. And in the chat, like, know that we're going to definitely come to your questions, and thank you for engaging and sharing what is landing for you and how. I'm going to pass it over to Chris. What has been your experience?
Just a couple points here. So from what I've seen from the members that I've worked with, and then also from my past experience before I was a leader, sometimes I felt like my voice was not heard or my feelings justified in those kind of conversations. I also felt rushed at times, pushed into reconciling, or conceded my position just to move on. I had fear of repercussions for bringing something forward. Felt the need to get others involved if I didn't get my way, and we see that quite often here in a unionized environment, and less likely to see all angles of the situation when you're not in the leadership role. As a leader, I have found the tendency to be quick to try and solve the friction. I have to remind myself to listen first before seeking solutions. Once I got into a leadership role, I developed better skills to collaborate with others and held myself to a higher expectation of professionalism. I have found that a large portion of my hard conversations are mediating members of my team, but no matter how experienced I am, I always have to remember that I can still cause friction. Realizing that some hard conversations need to be recognized by you. As a leader, you should seek out ways to improve your relations often, and at times ask for feedback. And building a network around you for support. This could be labor relations or peers that you trust to be able to support you is a huge advantage of being a leader.
I love the collaboration highlighted there. I think it releases that fear and stress, like going into that conversation. And I also love the idea of asking for feedback, because that's the best way to know like how we're doing, especially as a leader or even in a non-leadership role, right? With, okay, how did that conversation go? What can I learn from it? How would you like me to approach it the next time? So these are questions that I am coming up in my thought process here. Thank you so much, Chris, for that response. I'm gonna move on to Paul.
Right. Yeah, so my experience in hard conversation, oof, I it's a lot, but I would just narrow it down. So for the two part, which is personal or professional, for personal, I a I have hard conversation with myself on a regular day, like every day. I'm very reflective, so I journal, and there are certain things that, of course, is I might communicate it, or my wife, she knows me well. She hears me either talking to myself most of the time, or I'm just like, no, I'm fine. I'm just reasoning something out, or I just talk to her. I just run my thoughts with her, and then sometimes she asks me questions or she clarifies my thoughts and stuff. But I noticed that journaling has really helped me because it really puts things to perspective and makes me really strategize and just plot things. Doing that, I noticed that it has improved my emotional intelligence, wherein I'm able to recognize exactly what are the things that I need to start, stop, continue, the things I need to improve, the things I need to cut back, a better way to approach A, B, C, and Z. And also I'm like either studying on that particular subject matter that is either bothering me or influencing me or something like that. The other thing is, yeah, I made mention about my wife. I would say marriage is something that's taught me how to enjoy hard conversations, especially when you're talking about career choices, chores. I mean, just anything, everything itself. It's more like, oof, I need to learn how to be patient. I need to learn how to be compassionate, how to exhibit empathy and all that. And you will be shocked that I remember the day I learned active listening properly. I have been hearing about active listening. I have tried practicing it, but it just didn't make sense until I went through one course called Mental Health First Aid, and the facilitator walked us through it's a roadmap of when you are not listening to me. She said, it says, when you're not listening to me, you are telling me about your problem, like your thing or your process, your this, your that. And it listed it down, and I saw that this is exactly everything I used to do. And no wonder my wife says, you're not listening to me. And I'm like, oh, got you. And honestly, I said, if I can perfect it at home, I will perfect it at work. I'll perfect it anywhere. So I said, that's the foundation of me just perfecting this whole heart. So my wife, she's my case study. And honestly, I can say I'm doing very well at this point. Yeah. So, yeah. And professionally, I didn't mention during my introduction. So I currently work as an assistant supervisor in a nonprofit, and I'm currently supervising a program. But before I got onboarded as the assistant supervisor of that program, I was a facilitator. So I was facilitating front end, and it's a digital media course. We had clients who wants to learn graphic design, video editing, and they're coming with very high expectation. I call it pie in the sky. Like, you don't have the facilities, you don't have the tools, you don't have the knowledge to build a spaceship to fly to get to that pie in the sky. So having a realistic conversation with them, it was a hard conversation because they actually get benefit for onboarding the program, but you see some people who all they care about is the benefit, and they don't care about, staying in the program for a long time. So having that conversation to win their trust, to let them know that, hey, see, I care about you. I hear your feeling. I mean, I understand what it is that you want to achieve, but walking them through that conversation and making them realize that even if they don't enter the program, I still have their best interest at heart, and I'll provide them the resources, the tools that they need for where they are at that moment. Maybe it's not this program they need, maybe it's something else they need. And just winning their trust in that. Honestly, I've seen like really hot clients just calm down, and now we are best friends. And that has been really exciting. At the same time, I get to model and work my staff through, those who I'm currently supervising, the process on how to have this hard conversation, how to work with difficult clients, and even my staff, working with them, things like addressing incompetencies, coaching them, mentoring them, getting them excited to come to work, getting them excited to stay at work and achieve those high targets. It is a tough conversation, but but I would say the core of it all is when they realize that, hey, this person care about me, and your intention is for the best and for the greater good of what we define as success. Trust me, I noticed there's a huge shift, and that's been very, very empowering.
Mm. Oof. I'm just highlighting the marriage part, right? So if you want to have hard conversations, practice get married. Is that what you're saying, Paul? I'm just joking.
Yep.
Yeah, pretty much. I definitely want to highlight with your examples that you shared is the skills, there's a care, patience, trust, and intention. You really highlighted that in the examples that you shared. Thank you so much, Paul. I'm going to move on to the next question here, and I'll start off with you, Paul, and then make my way back. What has been the most challenging conversation that you've had with your team? A conversation that moved you out of the comfort zone.
Ooh, I thought of one that honestly, it blew my head backward. That was how it was.
You have
When
that
it
much
happened,
hair? Just kidding.
yeah, trust me. it it was rough. So when I got onboarded as assistant supervisor, there's this older sort of staff who has been there for a long time. We're talking of 15 years, pretty much old. And me, I'm just like say 3 years in thereabout. So I remember my supervisor was away and she asked me to normally I cover for her when she's away. So I was covering for her and I noticed I had to check in with this particular staff. And I checked in on him and he wasn't happy that I checked in on him. And he was just coming up with things like I'm monitoring him, this and that, blah, 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 you know. And he was really offended. And for me, of course, my intention wasn't to offend him. It was just me doing my duties, checking in on you. How's it going? How's where you went to? Da da da. So I was nervous, and I would say nervous in the sense that I didn't understand how to handle that type of situation. But after certain research and just like certain conversations I had with a couple of people I trust, I got to realize that, yeah, it's normal for me to feel that way because I was just feeling like this person is older than me, one, and two, they've been here for a long time. But then how I was able to resolve it was I had to talk to myself and realize that, yeah, I'm in this role because I am qualified. Like he might have applied for the role, but I mean, he didn't get it because perhaps he wasn't qualified, but I was qualified. I had the skill set that now has made me be onboarded to this role. Therefore, me acting in that capacity shouldn't at any point, be frowned on because I know my intention as a leader is to be highly effective and efficient and hold people accountable. So me holding him accountable and he's offended, that's on him, that's not on me. So I had to shift that whole thing from like, hey, this is my fault, da da da. And I'm like, okay, so now that this has happened, how can I handle this type of situation next time when it shows up? So it's me understanding my role and um the understanding my role and just looking at the bigger piece of everything. So yeah, self-conversation, very important. And then speaking with those I trust. Now, what happened was that I noticed that this approach has enabled me now when I speak to people who have been in the skin of the game for a long time and all that, I'm recognizing that I have something special to bring. I'm bringing in a unique perspective. I'm bringing in a unique contribution. I'm a valuable member. I'm a this and that. And that itself changes how I even look at myself and I approach the situation. So whatever it is, whatever negativity it is, it's not just coming to me as it has blocked off. Rather, I'm here, I'm responding on my duties and responsibilities. And speaking about this particular situation, I mean, of course, like when my supervisor came in, I told her about it. I told her how I responded to it. And then for sure, I also got to realize that some of this, like that attitude it's something that might have been entertained for quite some time and it wasn't checked. So therefore, me receiving that reaction from him is something that should have been by their former leader that should have been addressed. So for me, taking that as a learning is like, okay, what are the current attitudes that are going on in the people I'm overseeing that needs to be addressed so that it doesn't grow into that type of shape or form? So it was a huge learning opportunity to realize that there are some problems that, of course, as a leader, it's not you who initiated it. It has just been existing. So you want to identify if that is your battle to fight, or if you leave it to the person in charge to fight that battle who is equipped, or perhaps just walk to HR. That's it. And they support you. They support you with whatever tools or resources you need. Yeah. So identifying the battle. And I saw someone ask the question about if had conversations what having. For me, I've learned that there are some conversations, maybe not really. I can have an intro, but if it's not my battle, then I'll leave it for whoever needs to have that conversation and hope that they have that conversation.
Mm. Wow, that's incredible. And I can imagine the growth opportunity you gave to that employee, to that person on your team, right? And having that conversation. Maybe they've never had that opportunity to have a hard conversation. And I love the fact that you went for it and you learned from it and you went in, validating yourself before having the conversation. I think that's an important step to take, and knowing, okay, you're bringing in value, you have the skills, you're equipped to have that conversation. Thank you, Paul. I'm going to pass it over to Chris.
Thanks, Rassi. So a difficult conversation that I had to have was I had a situation where I had two employees, one a manager in power who also had a very influential power over not just myself but my location. So this manager is responsible for about 25% of my total sales weekly, so quite a lot. And another employee who is an entry-level leader. Both employees saw a need to provide great customer service for somebody down an aisle at the same time. The entry-level leader approached first to take care of the customer and provided their advice. The manager arrived second and listened. The manager then realized that the service needed was more in their expertise and proceeded to interrupt the entry-level manager to carry on the service. The entry-level leader proceeded to re-engage, now cutting off the manager to regain their advice and take the conversation back over. The manager then excused the customer and proceeded to direct the entry-level manager to the next aisle by placing their hand on their back and verbally directing them. Sorry, lights go out the room. During the redirection, words were allegedly exchanged and the approach combined for what came across as threatening for the entry-level leader and insubordination for the manager, as the advice given out was deemed unsafe. This was challenging as both employees thought they were in the right and wanted retribution. They both wanted me to terminate the other before being able to move on. It was made clear to me by each of them that if I didn't do how they saw it fit, I would receive their resignation and possibly further escalation, including legal action. Both employees were invaluable to the success of the business, and a solution was needed soon before escalation occurred. I reached out for help and seek guidance from my direct report. Several follow-up meetings were scheduled with the entry-level leader. My role was to listen and prompt questions to understand what the employee really wanted out of the situation. It was clear that all roads led back to a simple apology, partnered up with an admission that the approach should have been conducted in a different way. This breakthrough was taken over to the other side, and common ground was found surrounding the apology. All that was left was the approach, but the manager would not give in, believing that they were in the right. Time was then taken with the manager by scheduling another meeting at a later date and posing the same question then. This had a different result as time gave way to clearer thinking and a deal was settled to end the conflict. The meeting occurred and the manager gave the apology. To his surprise, the entry-level leader was receptive and proceeded to admit that they were also in the wrong and gave out an apology back. No further escalation occurred and relations remain civil to this date. Thank you.
I thank you for such a well thought out example and showing two different sides, Chris. Thank you. And I want to highlight, right, like with you mediating that conversation, finding the common ground. This is actually something that I read in the book Crucial Conversations, is what is that common ground? It's a great approach in having that crucial conversation and having one thing in the middle of helping us come to terms, come to a decision, steps to take forward. And I think it's such a great approach, like the example that you shared. I really appreciate that, Chris.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to pass it to Claudia.
I have been in so many hard conversations in my entire life. I could literally have this entire panel like, okay, let's write the book on this today, and this is what we're doing. But the conversation that sticks out to me, and I've experienced this with clients as well that are in leadership positions, there's always somebody above you. that you report to, that's your, your VP, your president, your CEO, whomever it is in the chain of command. If you're assistant manager, then it's, your regular manager, and then it's the leader, whatever. But I have found a lot of people hold back with the hierarchy. They have no problem speaking to their teams, their peers, but when it comes to telling their boss how it is, this is where the problems occur. And the fact that they're in the trenches with their people and they're not speaking on their behalf becomes a problem. So I will give you 2 examples. One, I had a VP who every time either someone was no longer with us, whether they were let go or whether or not they quit, he would pull an ego in a meeting and pull all the things that were absolutely wrong with them, which is why they didn't belong here in the first place, and basically tear them down. The key here is this didn't make him look better. This made him look worse. But he wasn't aware of that because he was obviously thinking, well, this is why it didn't work out and all of these things, to make excuses for what could have been salvaged. And knowing this about this person, I knew we were going into a meeting with the entire team about a specific person who had left. And we were getting ready to go out, and I stopped him and I said, listen, do not go in there and tell them all the things that are wrong with this person. This person worked here for a long period of time. They were part of the team. They were at the team events. We celebrated birthdays and anniversaries and all kinds of things. We knew this as a person, not just a team member. You going in there and tearing them down is only going to make things worse for you, for the culture, for the camaraderie, because now they're wondering, is this what you're saying about me when I'm not with you? So don't go in there and tell them all the things that are bad about this person. Wish them well. It doesn't mean it was a good fit. It wasn't for them. It wasn't for us. Whatever it is, they don't need to be torn apart because they were part of this team. And all you're doing is making yourself look bad. And I've experienced this with other people I've worked with that have said the same thing. Well, my boss doesn't listen, so there's really no point in having the conversation. There's always a point in having the conversation. And my advice was continue to keep doing it with integrity, with the mission involved, with your team in mind, because eventually those things will start to come through. And whether they listen or not, you have said your piece. But if you don't say anything, you become part of the problem. You have to try. And I have found in my own personal, when you challenge your leaders who are above you, they tend to listen because most people won't challenge them. And then they'll go, oh, maybe you have a point, or what do you think? So keep that in mind and control that personal power and come into it and always doing what's right and being integrous. If you lead with that, you're not doing it because you're trying to one-up them or hurt their feelings or make them feel a certain way before they go into a conversation, but you're looking out for everyone as a whole. And that reputation, that personal brand, that mission that you are known for has holes in it if everybody's not following it. Another example I can give you is when I was in an assistant manager position, there was a team of mine, one girl and another girl did not get along, and there were 2 completely different personalities, and it escalated and it kept escalating. And so I said what I always say, and I still say, we need to have a sit down, which means we need to get everybody in a room and have a conversation, like, let's air it out. If we get through this, it's not going to linger. In that conversation, I noticed the person who was on the more introverted side not speaking up. But I knew what was going on in this situation. So I stopped the extrovert from having an attack on this person. I said, listen, I know what's going on here, and this is how this isn't okay. And just because she's not willing to speak up for herself doesn't mean she's not right. So I'm going to help her with this. And in that moment, there was the other director and there was the owner, and everyone was sitting in the room. And when I went for what was right, I noticed that my manager at the time supported the person who was in the wrong. And I was like, I can't do it. I said, I'm sorry, she's wrong. This is not how this is going to work. And we're not going to be able to work together as long as this happens. And we ended up resolving the issue, and the owner was, fixing things, and we got it squashed. But in that moment, and I saw a question about communication and listening, body language said it all in that room. And that was the day that that leader lost the respect of the team, because she didn't stand up for what's right. She stood up for what was popular. And I won the team that day, because they knew, if you were in the right, I will have your back. And if you were in the wrong, I'm not going to dismiss you, but I'm going to teach you something. Food for thought.
Oh, it's the voice, right? It's use your voice and be that voice for the other person. And I love that you mentioned, thinking about the mission. I think it really sets the right intention in having that conversation, because it's not about self or the other person, but that, like you said, the bigger picture, right? The culture. Thank you, Claudia. It's awesome. I'm gonna pass it to Kim.
Awesome. So I guess I want to share a situation I was in. So usually when I think about a hard conversation, sometimes I think about giving feedback, or I'm not happy with someone's behavior or performance, but I want to take it up a notch. So the situation I was in that I'd like to share with you was a time when multiple team members were not happy with their manager's performance, skill set, and communication. So this caused the team members a lot of stress, and they were all coming to me being like, what should we do? So in this situation, I took a coaching stance here to help both sides and to get a full picture of what was actually happening in this situation. So following my guidelines I discussed earlier, I approached everyone with curiosity. So I wanted to understand the situation from everyone's different perspectives. So I meet with the team members separately. I met with the manager and the director separately to learn more about what was the root cause that was really bugging each person. And I wanted to understand like what behaviors and impacts this was actually causing. So for me, I would actually map this out visually so everyone was on the same page and we all could visually see the same information. So I would always be sharing my observations with each person just to make sure that like what I was documenting really resonated with them. So there were definitely skill sets and behaviors that needed to change on both the team members and the manager. So I worked with each individual to put together an action plan. So this ranged from changing behaviors, like coaching on how to ask questions, to helping the manager run their community of practice and teach outs. And also, I was just like helping to guide the director on the situation and what conversations needed to happen. So basically, I was the mediator between these three different parties. So where the challenge was in navigating these conversations was when the team members wanted to raise this to their director. So I wanted the team to feel that they were in a safe environment while still being able to freely voice their concerns and give constructive criticism. So we all wanted to see some action after this conversation. But having this conversation with such a large power dynamic difference is super tricky. So people are cautious with what they're saying and they also, they need the encouragement and they need the confidence to, to go to a director or someone that's above them in that pecking order. So I spent some time with the team to prep them for this conversation. So I actually helped them set up a topic champion for each issue. So what this means is that one person on the team was accountable to bring up the issue, describe what the problem was, and provide potential solutions to the director. So we discussed these out as a team to ensure that everyone was aligned. And this was quite a large team. It was about 10 people. So it was quite a lot of people to herd together and to make sure everyone was aligned. So on the day of the conversation, I helped navigate and mediate it. So I purposely left out the manager that was, that they were having issues with in this conversation in order to provide that safe environment. And I also helped by preparing speaking notes for the director to ensure, he was thanking the team for their time and effort and acknowledging all of that. So it was really enlightening to have this conversation, to see how the team and management could work together to provide a really healthy and safe environment, and seeing the willingness of people to change and ensure everyone's concerns were heard. So we had some really great outcomes. We had solid action items with set timelines. So we had a really great outcome from this conversation. So I hope this helps shed some light on some different types of difficult conversations where it includes multiple parties with different power dynamics. Yes, that was always an interesting one for me.
I want to highlight that each response you've given, there's your approach to understanding, like what is happening before even taking any action, it's very evident. Thank you for, highlighting that and sharing with us examples of how we can go about understanding and leading with curiosity. Thank you, Kim. I'll pass it over to Shauna.
Thanks, Razzie. All of these situations, it's such a wide variety of situations. I'm so glad we're having this discussion. So I had a couple in mind, but I'm going to bring up one that hasn't really been touched on. And so this particular situation was when I was working as a team leader in a particular office, and there was actually two of us that were in this office, and we reported virtually to an office in Hamilton. And one day I came in and I saw my manager there. I was really quite surprised to see my manager there since she doesn't actually work at that office. And she called me into a room and she told me that there was going to be an announcement. And the announcement was basically that they were reducing the staff in the office by half, and that the individuals would be going back to, they were on term contracts and they would be going back to their respective areas, which they wouldn't be happy. They were very happy working in the area that they were in. So basically a restructuring was happening where they were going from 4 center of expertise to 2. And so one of the office that I was in was one of the offices that they've decided that they were just going to have one team and then slowly reduce as people started leaving and that type of thing. So I had about 10 minutes to process all of this information before the announcement was going out, and it was going out on, at that time, it was it was an audio conference with the little star phones, and people just heard. So it was before, Zoom and MS Teams and that type of thing. So everyone heard the conversation, and all the while, as I was processing this announcement, because I didn't even get a chance to see my team or anything before we went straight into this meeting room for this discussion. And so all the while I'm thinking, my team's going to think that I knew what was happening and I didn't say anything. And, well, what's that perception going to look like and that type of thing. So it was very uncomfortable during the announcement and the conversation. And it was hard also for me, from my perspective, because I always believed in fearless advice and loyal implementation. But at that opportunity, I wasn't able to give any advice at all. So it was just loyal implementation based on the few minutes that I got as preparatory conversation. And so the announcement happened, my manager left. And so then I, was with the two teams. And so I'll also say that the other team leader was also leaving as well. So essentially this restructuring wasn't happening for a couple of months, but the work still needed to get done. The operations still needed to take place. So my approach in that situation was to have a group meeting, just us, and having a very candid conversation. I thought it was really important for everyone to be seen and heard, and also given the opportunity to have one-on-one conversations with individuals should they not feel comfortable. I think everybody processes things in a different way, and so some people need to be talking it out. Some people need a chance to take it back, kind of mull through it for a little while and then come back. And so that's the way that I approached it. I gave everyone the opportunity, and having the group discussion, it was venting, but then at the same time I was able to pull it back, like having that kind of a constructive discussion, and being able to then follow up the discussions and having the team know that I was there for them, not just my team that I was supervising, but the other team as well, because it was really hard for that other team leader to process what was happening as well. And also be, kind of that authoritative role, given that she was in that situation. So, sometimes being a leader is a coach, a counselor, a therapist. You've got all of these different hats on, and when I was able to handle that in a situation where they could be upfront and honest and understood that I was as taken back as everybody else, but at the same time, I was there to listen. And I think that was so important for the members of the team. And then also, once they were able to process it, look for opportunities, like where, given the situation, where do you want to go now? What's your next step? And even thinking of possibilities where those possibilities may have felt really constricted or constrained and not even been able to be top of mind, and be able to help them determine where they would like to go and how they can find opportunity in a situation of, a crisis. So that was my experience with a situation that was definitely many hard conversations.
Yeah, it's like hard conversations into a hard conversation. Wow,
Exactly.
I love the fact that you made them feel seen and heard. Like you created that space for them, that safety, right? Thank you. Thank you, Shauna. I think we're gonna go to the questions from our audience. I'm just gonna pick like someone in the panel. So the first question, I am thinking, you know what? Let's bring it to Claudia with this. When is a hard conversation not worth having? Is there ever a time when it's simply best to end the conversation with no resolution or clear end to the conversation?
Absolutely. There are some conversations with certain people. They're not willing to listen. You're not going anywhere. And it may actually escalate the situation worse because the more that they become defensive, or if they feel they're being attacked and then the reciprocation comes back on you, sometimes it's better to just agree to disagree and move on. I have been there as well. I've worked with some people who I've known that, that they're very hard-headed and they have a very difficult time admitting when they're wrong. I'm a big believer in saying, if it was me, I screwed up, I did it, how can I be better? Please give me feedback. But not everybody is that way. And when you go into a conversation and you're pointing something out, I can literally think of an example of a dear friend of mine that I actually worked with, and I was her mentor at the time, and I said, look, here's the deal. I know you well enough to know that this situation is actually coming from your past. Like, I know you to know that you are triggered by the situation, your relationship with your dad. I go, other people would not know that. I know that. But you still have to be open to listening to other people. And when you're constantly talking about yourself over people or ready to have a response, means you're not listening to them because you don't really care what they say. You're more worried about being right. And when you have a situation with a person who is more concerned with being right than really listening to the truth, and you know this person well enough to know that they're hard-headed, you can say what you have to say, but you need to go into it knowing it might not go anywhere. And you need to be okay with that. Because again, like we talked about in the beginning, and Shauna brought it up, we can't control the outcome. We cannot control the outcome of the situation, of what they're thinking and what it means to them. We can only go into it trying to help. But not everybody wants your help. And you need to be okay with that. And another thing is, it may not be their time to hear it. I've been told a million things in my lifetime. And in certain moments, it clicked. In certain situations, in timelines that were different, I was like, oh, I get that now because I've experienced. But in that moment, they may not understand where you're coming from because they don't see themselves there. That takes a little bit more self-reflection, like Paul, to understand, I do this, I say this, I am part of the problem. I do allow this is part of it. But not everyone is ready to look in the mirror. And you need to be okay with that.
Whew, that's really good. Okay, how about going to the next one? Paul, I'm actually going to come to you with the next question here. As a newer leader, I'm learning how to have hard conversation where my employee leaves the conversation feeling empowered and supported while still holding them accountable. I am so happy to be here to learn from you all on this topic. One skill I'm still trying to master is active listening, and more specifically, listening to what is not being said. Does the panel have any advice that they can share? Paul.
Wow, wow. Okay, that's full podcast episode.
Yeah.
But that was a good
100%.
question.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for directing that to me, because I would say, yeah, I'm 1 year in my leadership role, but before I onboarded the leadership role, I've been embarking on hardcore leadership development, which really helped to set the foundation. But one thing I notice about leadership is, especially as a newer leader, if you before you have this conversation with this person, you want to make sure that you set the foundation. And out of the foundation setting, I talked about having a hard conversation with yourself, because that is going to unlock the facilitating skills that you need. And the other thing you want to do is you want to build trust. And trust, it comes from how you treat them. They are seeds you need to sow. And it's more like, do you care for them? Are they fully aware about your intention as a leader? Do they know you to be someone that a very controlling type, that needs that things have to go your way, or are you a collaborative type of person? I feel like that itself would really make them want to open up to have that conversation with you and know that you have their best interest at heart. The other piece in building trust, there's something I call reasonable vulnerability, is the fact whereby you choose what it is that you want to share to the person. That's like, hey, I'm working on A, B, C, and Z, or I'm trying to master this skill set, and this is the steps I'm following. So what you're doing, again, is still a seed you're sowing, because you let them know that, hey, I'm even in the process of development and improvement as a leader. I mean, I'm not master know-it-all type of thing. And you are excited to share because you also want to see them improve in whatever area. Now, what you're simply doing is setting the foundation. Kim talked about researching exactly what it is, that subject matter, because you want to have your facts, your figures, your data, everything. You want to really approach conversations from a tactical and really logical perspective, not by feelings, right? The other thing you also need to do is identify the nature of the certain type of conversation with Claudia just talked about. Sometimes I usually wait for some people to encounter certain problems depending on the type of situation. And when they encounter the problem, that is my perfect invitation to provide a feedback or have a hard conversation. It depends on the situation though, but building one's mind to realize when to talk and when not to, very important too. The other aspect is having the conversation with the person. So this part, when you want to make a hard conversation, I usually make an invitation sometimes. I'm like, hey, did you notice sorry, do you need anything? Do you need any sort of support? I noticed that, sorry, I said, do you need support with, I fill in the blank with exactly the thing that maybe they're struggling with. And I'm like, I noticed that, maybe this date is fast approaching, and I see you struggling, and and I know you need certain type of support. I'm here to support you, type of thing. So depending, they might say yes, they might say no. Okay, no problem. The other thing I try to do is schedule check-ins, but the title is where the winning of heart usually comes in. How do you title some of the check-ins or the meeting? Something I'm learning too, how powerful just a title of a meeting invitation, it can reduce anxiety or increase anxiety. And that itself kind of gives that meeting a framework for you guys to work with. And in that meeting, you are approaching it with your data. I noticed this, and you clarify your intention. I'm here to help. I'm here to support. And they've seen that you really care about them. So that itself opens their heart, and they are willing and excited to work with you. And you guys are building a strategy, and you are letting them, almost like you are facilitating. And this is the beautiful thing about facilitation. You are not fully in control, just like what Claudia and Shauna said. You are just, I'm here to support. You know yourself better. You know your weakness. You know your strength. what are the things you think you feel like would help you in achieving this or in managing this and that? And you're letting them create the strategy, letting them set the plan. That way it's easier for you to hold them accountable because it's not just you telling them what to do, but it's them taking that reflection, which of course they now unlocking that skill itself, and they can repeat this over time when you are not there. That's them taking charge and ownership. That's the empowerment piece. So I strongly practice this every single time I'm checking in with my team. And trust me, it is mind-blowing. And for the follow-up piece, which it gets easier because they are the ones now, and it's more like, hey, how's it going? How's the item that you're working on? Do you need support? Is everything okay? And you don't even need to set another schedule for let's check in with this thing. You can just randomly, like over coffee or something, you're just like, hey, how's it going? And yeah, I strongly believe that, well, for me, my style of leadership is collaborative. Some people maybe not, but I noticed that that itself has been very, very helpful because now there's a newer generation coming into the workforce. That's something that is massively changing and shifting how the conversation has been taken. There are certain generation that you can follow certain process and everything works fine, but there are certain generation that if you follow that process, you are going to be witnessing a very high level of what's it called, turnover, because they need a different strategy and approach, and that's the collaborative piece. I hope that helps, though, and I trust that you have a good heart from the question. I see that you have a heart to help, and I hope that you continue winning in your leadership.
Wow, that's a fully loaded answer. Thank you, Paul. That's amazing. Next one would be for Kim. So Kim, I chose this, like I'm asking you this question because with your process and approach that you've shared all those steps, how can an individual handle defensiveness during tough conversations?
Yes, I have been in conversations where people get defensive, and I guess for me, like I always approach it from that seeking to understand perspective. So I'm always asking them questions and trying to figure out like what's going on with them. Like sometimes I even start with a really, really broad, open-ended question, like how's life? Like what's going on? Has something happened? Sometimes it could be totally unrelated to the situation causing this behavior.
Right.
You just never know. So always starting with that with an open mind, like asking them, are they even ready and up for this conversation? Because maybe they're not in like the right mindset right now to be having that discussion. So always starting out, just trying to figure out the situation and what's going on there. And if they're still defensive, another approach I would take is like call them out on it. Like, what's going on? I noticed that when I say this, you're being really defensive. Like talk to me. What's happening here? And just trying different tactics to uncover like where is this really coming from and what is that root cause. Like maybe it's something like maybe they're not aligning with like how they're seeing themselves and what other people are seeing, or maybe there's like a conflict there. Maybe it's an internal conflict, but you just never know until you have that conversation. um, I guess for me, also remembering to create that safe environment, to always ensure that like what you're saying to me, it's confidential. It's going to be between me and you. What's in this conversation isn't going to go out to anyone, and that's just going to bring them down to that calmer state. And always at the end of the conversation, I always end it with, "What can I share with others after?" So we had a long conversation. What are the main bullet points that I can say are our takeaways or our action items? Sometimes when I ask this question, people will be like, you know what? I actually don't want to share point 2, 3, 4 with anyone. That's just, how I'm feeling, and I want that to stay like that. So it's always good to align with like, what can I bring to, say, your manager or my manager, just so we're all on the same page and I'm not overstepping. And that really builds that trust between me and that person of whoever I'm talking to, and hopefully that will bring down that defensiveness.
Woo, that's a soft approach. I love that. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. All right. So next one's for Shauna, and then Chris, I'll come to you with the last question there. First, Shauna, before going into a hard conversation, do you have a mantra that you like to say to yourself to help keep you centered and focused?
I would say I don't necessarily have a mantra, but I set myself up with intention. So what kind of emotions do I want to cultivate during this conversation? Compassion, understanding, empathy, curiosity is a huge one, because I think that when you approach a conversation with curiosity, then you let go of, when we're just talking about defensiveness, and a lot of times defensiveness comes from the need to be right. And if you look at it as there's right on both sides and there's wrong on both sides, and knowing that in approaching with curiosity, I think it helps a huge amount. I like the idea of writing points out, that Claudia had mentioned too, to be able to, and even if you don't necessarily give them the piece of paper, but have it as a framework so that you're staying centered and focused, and you can refer to your points all throughout the conversation. And I think the third one that I'd like to touch upon is really controlling that stress response. Because once you're going into that conversation and having your stress response elevated, you don't have access to the thoughts and ideas that you would normally have when you're in a calm kind of state. So ensuring that deep breathing, making sure that you're taking breaths along the way, that's taking care of yourself throughout the conversation, so that you're able to access those thoughts and ideas throughout the conversation and come into it with a clear head.
I love it. Love it. Setting the intention is so important. And I love that you mentioned what emotion do you want to cultivate in that conversation. That's something new for me that I'm gonna take away. So thank you, Shauna. Thank you. Last one here, Chris. I know we're creeping up to our time. We might go 5 minutes over. I thank you for your patience in advance. So for Chris, I would love to hear the panelists' thoughts on how differences in language fluency, so native versus non-native speakers, affect power dynamics or perceptions of authority during difficult conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. So on my management team, I have somebody who's, a native speaker of Tagalog, so they're from the Philippines. In terms of their work and I guess their job knowledge right across our province here in Alberta, they, in my opinion, are the number one most experienced and I guess professional manager in that field. So they're the person that they get called on to go out to other stores to be able to help either open up locations or help train or physically show how the job should be done. However, the one barrier that's in the way that's moving them to the next position is language. And that was directed to me from their direct supervisor. We call them a regional manager. And so anyways, we collaborated on that and said, how are some ways that us as a team here in our store are able to help this person move forward? So what we decided to do is to have my manager here to lead our meetings for our weekly budget meetings. So it's going to get that practice in that every single week she's feeling more confident in able to run an agenda, give out direction, and prompt questions to the other managers. And it's going to make her feel more comfortable to be able to do so, because when she does move to the next role, she'll be in charge of up to 18 other managers in that same field, and we'll have to hold them accountable for all metrics, even their personal problems they might have, or job problems they might have. She'd have to be able to communicate that, and that's something that currently isn't happening. On the other side of things too, even though I see her operate every single day flawlessly, when we do interviews for the next role here in the store, when I prompt the questions, her answers just aren't there. And I have to almost fill in the blanks for her, because I understand that she knows what she's doing, right? I have to ask follow-up questions as we're going through it. And it's something where, her true skill set just isn't being shown. Mm-hmm. So how do we get around that? It's going to be practice, being open about, where the shortcoming is, and essentially what our company needs from her to be able to move into the next position. So she's been very receptive of it, and I'm there to coach her all the way through.
Wow. I do love that collaborative piece, right? Like you're all coming together to support her. I think that it's so important. Thank you for unpacking that, Chris. So with the interest of time, I do understand it's in the evening. Some of us may have had dinner. Maybe we were having dinner while you were joining us. I do want to be respectful of your time in joining us today. And I want to thank every single panelist who said yes to joining us and unpacking this topic. I know there's so much more that is going to come from this conversation. So definitely stay tuned. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Shauna. Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Chris. And also, Jay, thank you for monitoring the chat and making sure that everyone it feels seen and heard. And I hope we covered all your questions. Thank you for copy and pasting that over, Jay. And to our audience for joining us and making that choice to learn more about hard conversations and having them. And I wish you the best in any state that you're in and in any stage or step, whatever you name it, that you're at in having hard conversation. Please do not stop. Keep going for it, learn from it, and then do better from it with love and compassion for yourself. At the end of this week, you'll receive a PDF with all the information of every single person on our panel today so that you can reach out to them and have more awesome conversations with them. I really invite you to connect with them. They're absolutely amazing like human beings. I'm just really grateful, very grateful that every single one of you joined me on stage. And there's also a survey that will pop up the moment you leave this meeting. Please let us know how we did because we want to do better. I want to do better. Jay wants to do better. Our panelists want to do better so that we can be more helpful in the future in having more conversations like this. Thank you all so much for being here and have a beautiful evening.